In the interest of time, I will focus on a few of my slides rather than my whole presentation. You will receive the slides later on so you can look more into detail about what we found. One of the topics that Yulia noted was the role of the lawyer, and we've had quite extensive discussions while developing these recommendations about probably a lot of what the child needs to be aware of and show an understanding of in the interview is something that the lawyer has a role in, a very important one, to educate the child before they go in to the interview. So this is the origin of why we asked the questions that we did about the lawyer, and we found out through some of your replies that broadly speaking, across all of the replies that we got, the interview with the child suspect should not continue if the child has not had a chance to meet with their lawyer. However, it can happen in practice that only sometimes does the child have an opportunity to meet with their lawyer. It can also happen rarely that they have this opportunity. They might only meet their lawyer a few minutes before the interview happens. And one respondent noted that whether the child has enough time, support, or developmentally appropriate explanation to understand the advice is something very different from that mandate that they should meet their lawyer before the interview. Also, one respondent noted that it is their right to have access to a lawyer, but it is not an obligation. So they could say that they don't want to meet with a lawyer. And it also seems that it can depend on the employee, or maybe sort of regionally in terms of if you live in a bigger country, maybe some regions have better routines around having access to lawyers for child suspects than others. So one question to you all here is, what would be helpful, if anything, for us to consider including or explaining further in the guidance to help you to motivate having more routine, robust access to lawyers for child suspects? We've been talking a lot about the right to silence, and I don't want to go too much more into depth here because I think it's been covered very well. But here are some example quotes that we received in the survey responses that I wanted to put to you all to jog your brain to see if you react. Is there really good language that you would like to use? Is there language that you aren't sure if it would be okay to use in your context? We would love to know. And I'll read each one out loud so you have time. You have the right to remain silent. This means you do not have to say anything you do not want to say. You can choose to stay silent for all questions, or you can decide to answer only the questions you want to answer. The next example is, to clarify what may have happened, we are going to ask you several things, but you can tell us whatever you want to, or if you prefer not to answer, you can do that too. The next example. If you have done something that is illegal, forbidden, or otherwise something you think you should not have done, you don't have to tell me about it. The next example. Lying is not a punishable act, so it's up to you what you tell me, if you want to tell me anything at all. The next example is a bit longer. This is all one example. If you think that you have done something that might be criminal, illegal, wrong, or cause problems with the police, You don't have to tell me anything about that. Because you are a suspect, you don't have to say anything to me. You don't have to tell me the truth. You can also lie if you want to. You don't have to help me investigate or clarify this matter. But I also want to say that you can, of course, tell me about the things, and I think that it's really important to hear your side of the story. I think that everything can be sorted out, and I am here for you today. So those are some examples to think about and reflect on in this discussion. On the topic of ground rules, we've talked already about children want to comply before they truly understand the rules. Small children may have a hard time understanding what it means to not guess. One respondent said something I think that's very important to bring into this discussion, is that there are too many ground rules. It's just very hard for young or disabled children to take in everything. Another respondent said that they keep the ground rules to the bare essentials under any given circumstances. I profile before interviewing and check my instructions, so I have some basis for prioritizing critical ground rules. And one respondent noted that understanding is not the same as agreement. I think we've also covered that quite well. Moving forward a bit more. We've been talking a lot about rapport today. I wanted to raise out one of the key feedbacks that we received, this difference between necessary rapport and manipulative rapport. That could also be interesting to reflect on in discussion. And then the last slide I wanted to bring out, many questions come out of surveys. Typically when we do them, we end up coming out with more questions than we had going in. These are some of them. One of the feedbacks we got was about narrative practice, about, well, first of all, that it can be support accurate free recall, but it could also create pressure to provide an account. And another comment on the narrative practice had to do with memory and the ground rules. So the ground rules are often introduced, or have to be introduced in the very beginning, because of what Julia mentioned, that in order for the interview to stand up in court, the child needs to have demonstrated that they understand these key ground rules first. So if the ground rules happen, and then the narrative practice, and then by the time you get to the examining the accusation, does the child still remember the ground rules and have the same ability of applying them, is the comment that we received. And I will leave it there to make sure that we can get to comments and discussions.